Hi, welcome everyone to a deep and wide conversation this morning with Grant Abraham, the leader of the United Party of Canada, on this holiday Monday, October 14th, 2024. Now, I don't do these very often, and to be honest, I felt divinely inspired to do this. So here we go. And, I guess first off, I just want to wish everyone a blessed Thanksgiving. I know that we're in the most challenging of times, and yet there are so many things that, we do have to be thankful for our lives. And so I want to encourage you to take that time and reflect on what's in your life today that you're thankful for and to express it to those around you. Life is short, and I encourage you to not withhold love and thanksgiving from those around you. And so now, while I have much to be thankful for, I do have some things sitting in my heart and spirit. And while Canadians gather around this weekend with close family and friends, my heart is heavy and my heart is burdened for the things that are coming and the things that are at hand. The state and the nation of Canada, that is being systematically deconstructed right now, right before our eyes, and has been strategically for years. Families coast to coast here, in Canada are in a very hard place right now, while our federal government is like a ship out at sea, in a storm without a rudder or a captain. And that's why we need to have the conversation that we're going to have here today. So before I really get going, I just want to shamelessly ask that as you watch this, that you would share it out far and wide. If we're going to save our nation and get our nation back, we all must do our part. And believe it or not, this is a big part of just that, bringing education and awareness. And so, you should be able to share this conversation by text, by messenger, repost it on your social media. It'll be a Rumble link that you can send to your family and friends, loved ones, colleagues. If you're in chat groups or chats, share it out with them. And I will even go so far as to ask that you even send it to other leaders, in your circles to make them aware of some of these things and these literally critical issues and share about the grassroots, unconventional governmental movement and response that is unfolding right now across our nation. Now, knowing what I know, knowing the threats that are active in Canada and North America for that moment, I know for myself that I must do all I can to help bring an awareness to Canadians with things that they need to hear right now to navigate through the days that are ahead. And I honestly wouldn't be able to live with myself had I not done all I could to help. I mean, I have to keep my conscience clear, and that's why I'm doing this today. Now, also, before we get started, your questions for Grant and the United Party of Canada. Often we start these things, these interviews, these meetings, and the chat starts to go crazy with questions and, about Grant and this and that, or what's going on further. And what I'm going to say, I know that you're going to have a lot of questions for Grant by the time we're done this. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is clearly message those questions here into the comments of this Rumble video. And uh, I will ask Grant and his team to do their best, all of us to get those answered for you. So, with that being said, uh, I hope that you have a hot coffee, a hot cup of tea, a cool cup of water, and a big piece of pumpkin pie uh, with you there today as we get started and let's see what happens. So, welcome, Grant. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me today in this important conversation. And for the record, uh, this video conversation, I expect it'll be a bit raw and unpolished, kind of technically. I mean, I'm not out of a big fancy studio. I mean, I don't have one. I'm sitting in my basement at my desk in my office. Uh, and for the record, this is not going to be edited. I mean, it's in any way, it's going to be raw. What we get, we get. and that's what will be shared. And so I felt led to have a wide range conversation with you today, and I'm not putting a time limit on it. I think we would be amiss to do so. Um, I hope we can talk about many issues that legacy parties and the legacy political parties and media are not too willing to talk about publicly in a meaningful way for Canadians. And now we have a lot to cover, and I'm prepared to take an hour or two to get through everything that we have to talk about today. So for our viewers, as it's recorded, if you can't get through it all in one sitting, you can start it and work your way through it in a couple of blocks as time permits. But I know that it's critically important that you get through it all because front to back, I've got a lot of things that we need to talk about. And so I've also asked that it be timestamped in the comments. And so I've got a friend of mine who is actually going to be timestamping it. And we'll share that list of the timestamp topics along with that link. And so that you can drill down to hear that part where he talked about, A, B, C, or D. So with no further ado, uh, thank you, Grant, for taking time to sit down today. Happy Thanksgiving to you, your wife, and your family. And I guess with my background and the things that I'm involved with, in the world as a Canadian prophet. I guess one of the questions I would have is, well, one, have you had any pumpkin pie this weekend? And two, why would you, consider and take the time to chat with a guy like me today?
Well, good morning, Barry. Let me just say happy Thanksgiving to you, and thank you as well for hosting this conversation. I think in some ways a conversation like this is quite unconventional in terms of having a politician who is interested in seeing Canada changed sit down with someone who within the Christian church is understood to be a prophet. I guess my perspective on this is a very simple one, and that is that Canadians need to look at what's going on in our nation very differently than they've been looking. We are in muscle memory in our country. A few years ago, that's exactly where I was as a person who was looking at Canada. I was really frustrated. I could see the problems that Justin Trudeau was creating in the country. And the default for me was to say, well, look, what we need to do is get rid of Justin Trudeau and get rid of the Liberal Party, and things will be okay, or at least better enough to continue on with our life, our RSPs, our whatever, retirement planning, everything that Canadians do, going to Mexico, whatever. And I think, though, with COVID, there were a bunch of pieces that really had me begin to change my perspective. And some of those things were comments that Justin Trudeau had made, like Canada is going to be the first post-nation state. And when I heard that comment, we're back in 2019, 2020, I got very concerned because I knew what that meant. That meant that there was a movement away from our natural sovereignty, away from the inalienable rights of the individual. And in the years that followed that comment, it's taken the time from 2018 to now for Canadians to begin to be able to understand what that actually means. It means that our charter that we thought was so great to support our peace, order, and good government suddenly doesn't mean anything. We see a two-tier policing system. We see a politicized court system. We have a country that we really can't recognize. And when you look at the demographics in Canada at the last census, there was still 53.3% of the nation that identified with the Christian faith. No one wants to talk about that demographic reality from our census. Before that, and before they changed the questions to refine the answers, the number was up into the 60s. And so this is a huge block of Canadians that hold a value system that are actually linked into our understanding of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And yet, and this is really the launch point for this conversation in so many ways, we have a huge swath of the country that is simply looking and still saying all we need to do is get rid of Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party, and we'll be okay. And yet, when you really look at what's happening, you really examine what's going on, what the Conservative Party have not done or what they have done, most of the Canadians that I used to be, in relation to my perspective on the Conservative Party, would no longer feel comfortable actually voting within the Conservative Party if they took a sober look at what's going on in our nation. And so this question is a huge question. It's not about politics, it's about patriotism. It's about what we actually need to look upon to decide the future for our country. Because right now, what's happening is the vision for this country, the original intent and design for this country, and I'll say this country as a nation that's founded upon principles that emanate from the supremacy of God and the rule of law, that vision for this nation is being stolen. And if we have our vision for our nation stolen in terms of the value system that built our nation, our future is being stolen. So this is a message really for the Christian church. It's a message for all the people that are perhaps slumbering inside the Conservative Party and saying, this is all we got to do. We've always voted Conservative, like I did, to examine a few things and actually look and say, are you comfortable with the fact that the Conservatives have not engaged this discussion about what post-nationalism means, what globalism means, what it means to have our health decisions made by someone in the UN rather than someone in Edmonton or Victoria. The other piece is the huge changes to the structure of our family. We have a Conservative Party now that has passed Bill C4 unanimously, and that is a bill that is basically criminalizing parents if they seek to get in the way of their children transgender transitioning. 5 years in prison if you pray for, counsel, or intervene in that progression towards gender change, or if you take your child to a pastor or a counselor. Mm-hmm. Every one of the existing Conservative MPs, with the exception of one that was elected in a by-election, voted yes for that. And for every Canadian that I've talked to, and that's been thousands in this last year and a half, when they look upon that and they actually reflect and say, you are voting for that, you are casting your lot with that breakdown of the nuclear family, they're disgusted. And so this conversation is about truth. It's about light. This is irrefutable, what it is that I'm telling you. Whatever the excuse is that your local MP tells you, this is what's happened. And so this quest to attain power so that power can be possessed and then these things changed is no longer ringing true in Canada. There's been 20 years of these kinds of value compromises in our nation that the Conservatives have either been in power and did nothing about, or been the opposition and have not spoken in opposition to any of these types of issues. So this is a huge conversation for Canada. It's a deeper look. If people believe that it's all we need to do is axe the tax and grab some common sense, we are in dire trouble. And this is an opportunity to look upon the journey and to gaze upon what's at stake and to actually take stock and put your faith, and I'm speaking to the 53.3% of Canadians right now, and put your faith into motion to actually steward and take responsibility for this nation. That's what this conversation is about.
Grant, that's a great kickoff. I mean, what you led in with there, I mean, you haven't seen the questions that got on the list today. And I'm excited that we can have an open, honest, transparent, authentic conversation about this. Now you're a new name and a new face to Canadians, and many, they really don't know anything about you. They don't know anything about anything about you at all. So can you start maybe by just telling our viewers just a little bit about you and your background and your family?
Sure. Well, my name's Grant Abraham. I was born in Alberta, raised in Lower Mainland in BC. married to a lovely lady called Caroline, have 4 boys that are at the moment all over the world doing different things. And I really had no ambition to be engaged in politics at all. It really was a journey that began with really a sense that I needed to engage a discussion within the Conservative Party to bring reform to the Conservative Party, because I could see that after the string of leaders that we had in the last 4 or 5 years that ran through the leadership cycle, the real issues weren't being talked about, and the grassroots Conservatives were frustrated. I was seeing a Conservative Party that was pushing stuff down into the throats of the grassroots. No longer was our understanding of the grassroots pushing stuff up into the Conservative Party working any longer. I was a vice president of a local electoral district association in BC, and I was really frustrated with the way information was communicated. And so when the leadership race came around in 2022, I engaged that leadership race really as an act of faith and obedience in terms of what I felt Canada needed. And I learned an awful lot in that journey. It was post-convoy. Everyone was coming back to Western Canada after the convoy. And I saw Canadians switching on because they heard truth being spoken to them, because they had hope being spoken to them about what the destiny of our nation is to be about, which is prosperity and security and safety and peace and order and good government, and the things that we understand in terms of even how communities work and taking care of our neighbors. And this kind of return to these value discussions, I could see lights coming on in people's eyes. At that point in Canada, I couldn't travel on an airplane because I wasn't vaccinated.
Right.
That meant that my national campaign for the leadership race of the Conservative Party never left BC and Alberta. And that was a really interesting time because I saw some amazing things happen. It took me 6 weeks to raise $50,000, which got me into the interview stage for that race. I don't think that the panel of 13 or 14 people thought that I would go much further, especially when they knew that I needed $250,000 in the next 10 days. and I just said to them, well, look, you will be the sterling example of democracy if you allow a total outlier to come into the discussion and actually participate in this race. And they said, yeah, you're right. We're going to let you do that. And you know what? It was a miracle, because 10 days later, that $250,000 had come in. And I'm not sure the Conservative Party knew what to do with me then. What they did do was find a reason to bar me after I'd passed all the hurdles and raised the money. And I'm not here to talk about that, because I actually think that our problems have compounded since 2022 in terms of what's going on and what we know is going on. In Canada, we have an enemy within that no one is pointing towards,
Right.
that no one is talking about in terms of what are the threats that are undermining our nation. We have a committee of our government that has met and found that there are up to between 50 and 60 MPs that are under direct foreign influence and can be agents of foreign interference inside our elected parliamentary caucus. And those names aren't being released. And there's a constant discussion about an election. Things that are happening in our nation are baffling. And this is exactly why we need to have a party that is prepared to speak to this. I have not been a career politician. I'm a lawyer by training. In fact, I've been doing a lot of work internationally as a humanitarian and a social impact investment advisor. And I've never been in office in Canada. I don't sit on the Privy Council like most of the individuals that are running
Mm-hmm.
right now in our
Mm-hmm.
nation. We have some deep-seated issues in terms of our constitutional structure.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many pieces that we can actually talk about here
Yeah.
today, Barry, but I've really been brought into this because I believe that Canada has a huge gap, a deficit, and it's not talking about the issues. The gap is the disconnect between our founding values and the values that we understand that emanate from our people, our culture, and our traditions are being lost because there's been a disconnection with the fundamental values that are embedded in our Constitution, which are the supremacy of God and the rule of law.
Yeah.
And you know what? A lot of people will say to me, "Oh, you're trying to, you're trying to establish a Christian party." Not at all. In fact, it's very much the opposite in the sense that the supremacy of God and the rule of law is the framework that allows people to not have any religion and be free to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really as far as I need to go in terms of that discussion. But what those values have done is set the framework up for our nation to thrive. And if
Mm-hmm.
you look at the nations in the West that have thrived in the last 100, 150, 200 years, they've all been predicated upon the same values. And we are now self deconstructing because of the frameworks that we're allowing to exist in our country and be unchallenged. So, unless people are actually prepared to have this conversation and bring it into a framework where there's a robust value conversation, so we can actually say what is right and what is wrong and why, we're going to continue adrift from our moorings in this country. And so, I know I probably strayed here in terms of my background, but it actually speaks exactly to my heart about
Mm-hmm.
the core framework that we need to reestablish in our nation, and that is truth and justice and uprightness, because that's what we identify with as Canadians. That's what allows us to prosper. That's what allows us to be secure and function and walk in the blessing that we've walked in for generations and generations. And we are too easily allowing that to be discarded, and no one is speaking to that message.
Yeah.
And the irony is, and maybe you can comment on this too, I think you can. The irony is that the people who know this at a deeper heart, spirit level, we'll call it the church in Canada, Christendom in Canada, if you will, they seem to be sleepwalking over the cliff, looking and listening to what the conservatives are saying, which are simply band aid solutions to the real threats to our country. And
Yeah.
so that's why I'm having this conversation with you today. That is why I'm taking the very unusual thing of actually, unusual step of actually setting up a new party, so that we can contend for this nation and speak the truth to Canadians, because we're being robbed of our future.
Mm-hmm.
We must have these conversations. So thank you for hosting this, and thank you for being willing to allow this to be discussed wherever this interview goes.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you so much, Grant. I mean, you shared a lot there. It really does give a good glimpse into who you are, into your heart, into your passion for truth, and your passion to get Canada, back on a foundation that we're called to be, and basically get off this track that they've got set for us into post nation straight. Now, I get a lot of feedback. Anything I share, anything about you on, our platforms, and they're following the journey that we're on, in the nation. And a lot of the questions we get, are, you know, uh, that they don't know, who is Grant Abraham, who is he, what he's doing. Truthfully, most Canadians, you're kind of new to. And I do get a lot of fear-based, kind of angry remarks and messages about fringe parties and vote splitting and all of that when I talk about this emerging grassroots movement that's unfolding right now in Canada and with the United Party of Canada. So Canadians need to hear the whole narrative.
Mhm.
I looked the other day, someone sent me a thing on True Social actually, and I didn't count, but I think there was like 14 or 15 registered federal parties in Canada right now. And but Canadians need to hear the whole narrative, and there are millions who need to hear what you're really talking about, and the road of destruction and post-nationalism are current legacy parties have us on. Now, frankly, Canadians need to hear what you are saying, that the legacy political parties and paid legacy media and censorship laws are not wanting Canadians to talk about. We know that they're doing all that they can to suppress anything that would, that would bring truth from being shared. And honestly, I don't know if Canadians really, really understand the critical time that we're in, and the church included in that. And my hope and prayer today is that this conversation will help break things down for them, to the average everyday Canadian, so it'll help them kind of understand really where we are as a nation right now, and get your heartfelt perspective on what we can do to save it. And so I do have a lot of questions for you today, and I know that the grassroots story, that has kind of brought you to this point, but it's really time for Canada here to hear it, digest it, and engage in it. And so, I mean, I get questions like, Barry, who do you vote for? Do we have a representative of the United Party of Canada in our riding? And so I'm going to just kind of shotgun some of these down, and if you can give some responses, and we'll start to kind of work through the list, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Well, look, let me just make a few comments on your preamble there, and just say this question about a fringe party. Let's have a conversation about that. It wasn't that long ago, 20 years ago, the Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party, as it was, blew itself up. And there was the development of the Reform Party in Western Canada. Many of the people that would be maybe listening to this show, or interested in this conversation from the perspective of faith and values, would have been a part of that party. In fact, my own family was that. There was, as we all know in Canada, there was a reconvening of the conservative thinkers under Stephen Harper, which was a good idea. The promise that Preston Manning made was that there would be strength in joining with the fiscal conservatives, bring the reformers, the social conservatives, as they were in the Reform Party, which started out, I'd add, as a fringe grassroots party. And they really amalgamated around this idea of responsible conservatism and social conservative values. Like right now, for example, we have no abortion law in Canada. We can abort a baby mid-birth, and it's been very interesting for me traveling across the country. There are so many issues, or people, excuse me, there are so many people who look at that. They don't hold a particular faith perspective, but they're not okay with that position in our law. And I think that we need to revisit that. And that was part of the standard that was brought into the new Conservative Party under Stephen Harper. And what's happened is that those voices, those values, those important, I would call them values, I'd call them spiritual values. I call them, for many people, they're non-negotiables. Those have simply been ignored and dismissed. And what has happened in the relationship within conservatism has been that those social conservatives have just been muted. And
Right.
before an election, they get some cuddles and kisses, and there's a few National Post articles like that's going on right now. Pierre Poilievre has done an article in the National Post where he's talking about supporting abortion. Leslyn Lewis has done an article where she's speaking to the advancement of stiffer penalties for the burning of churches by arsonists, and those are really gaslighting techniques to speak to the social conservatives, to give them the confidence that the Conservative Party hasn't forgot about their interests.
Right.
And when you actually stop and you just look at those two things, the Conservative Party for 20 years has not engaged any discussion about life
Right.
or stopping or impeding abortions. They haven't. In fact, Pierre Poilievre has said that he won't advance any of those issues. And yet we have half of the Conservative Party that are, probably reform-minded thinkers or social conservatives saying, well, what are we going to do with that? I guess we just got to get into power and then we can make the changes, even though there's 20 years that's gone by and that hasn't happened. Or you
Right.
look at Leslie Lewis's position saying, well, I'm advancing, or I'm going to help support advancing this legislation to make, to bring higher penalties for people that start church fires. Well, that's gaslighting, because if we don't have a police force that's prepared to enforce the law against arsonists burning churches,
Yeah.
it's not going to matter if the sentencing is more severe. It's
Yeah.
just gaslighting.
Yeah.
So this is really so much of what this conversation's about for Canadians now, and we have to reinvigorate a connection with Canadians and their fealty, their patriotism for their country, because
Right.
so many of these issues are connected into the the enduring, into Canada enduring. And if we're going to end up with a country that we don't identify with, none of us are going to be happy. So it's time for these stones to be turned over on these kinds of issues, to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And this is where I talk about the kind of social conservatives in Canada having Stockholm syndrome, because
Right.
what happens is these values never get advanced. You get these gaslighting little offerings that maybe there's these issues are going to be advanced, or these kind of Christian perspective, if you will, is going to be cared for in our nation, but it doesn't happen.
Right.
And so the Conservative Party moves along. The social conservatives have to suck it up till the next election, and so the story goes. And now we're 20 years down the road, except that now we have a liberal government that is actually saying that our nation is going to become a post-nation state,
Hmm.
which means we're moving away from our charter rights. We're moving away from our understanding of having inalienable rights, because we've been created and understand that we've been created in the image of God. Therefore, our rights are inalienable because of that creation.
Hmm.
And these are very deep issues,
Agreed.
and for a long time, Canadians have not wanted to have these conversations because they're slightly awkward, or maybe someone's going to feel sensitive about having that conversation in case they don't believe in God. But now it's gone even further, and we've all seen it. When are we going to have a conversation about what Canada is in the face of militant Islam burning our flag on the street and calling for the
Right.
death of Canada?
Right.
At what point are we going to actually activate and say it's such a cop out to say it's going to split the vote?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
Conservative Party won't speak to those issues, and the Liberals are clearly allowing it to happen.
Yeah. We're
So
going to get into
we
a little
need
bit
to
more.
have this conversation. Our country will be lost.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to have I've got a couple questions around those issues coming up that will give you opportunity to speak into it. One of the other things, Grant, that has come up is, what about uniting all of the other, smaller conservative parties and leaders into one? Should we talk about our efforts to do that? Should we talk about the Winnipeg meeting that we had with these party leaders, that, what that looked like, and what it came out of it? We know Maxime Bernier and the People's Party, are often mentioned. Rod Taylor and the Christian Heritage Party, Derek Sloan, the True North Party, which actually is no more. Derek let that kind of dissolve, as he's now called into provincial leadership in Ontario. And do you think that there's a potential for any floor crossers within some of these other parties that would hold the same value framework that you have? And maybe there would even be a few in the Conservative Party that feel kind of stuck there because, they're not able to freely share their voice, and because
Sure.
they're controlled by, you know, things in the background there and maybe they're even EDA leaders from across Canada, in some of these ridings, that are frustrated that their hands are so often tied in their work. They go to a national convention with their suggestions in the federal conservative deal, and at the end, Pierre says, "Oh, well, that's nice you did all that, but probably not going to use any of them. Anyway, are you open for these conversations, or could you throw a little bit of
Yeah,
insight
I mean,
of this?
let's have a conversation. I think there's some great patriot freedom fighter parties out there. I think a lot of what Rod Taylor has done. There was a vision for Canada that was articulated within the Christian Heritage Party back in 1987. I remember it actually being birthed. Um, that's coming on to 40 years, if my math is correct. And there's 4,000 members in that party. They're great people, and they haven't attained a seat, and that's a challenge because they simply are being marginalized. I think because of the identification of their name, fairly or unfairly. And so, to all those people, I think that we can have a discussion in Canada where we can respect the Christian roots of this nation without having to have that become an overlay for all Canadians. Because clearly, freedom is in Canada is to allow for people to have freedom of religion or no religion, and so that is why I push against that kind of labeling. I want people to be able to be free in this country and not be have systems where we have reverse discrimination because of whatever scenario that we choose to have reverse discrimination on, if it's skin color or faith or whatever. We don't want a Canada like that, but that is what is in front of us.
Mhm.
And so, you know what? I respect those people. I'm sure they're all good people out there, but we've got to engage and take back the gate of government in terms of bringing truth, justice, and uprightness again back into our nation. So you can have an apologetic within a political party like the Christian Heritage Party does, and if it's not tractioning, then what is the point? And I suppose when we have had conversations with the People's Party, that's a very interesting party too, because I respect their journey in the sense that they were the first advocates, really, in terms of starting to see this movement away from freedom. And Max Bernier was put out of the leadership race and removed himself from the party and established the People's Party on the shoulders of a freedom platform and a libertarian platform. That's a very interesting conversation for me because. Well, I guess there's two pieces to it, really. When I've talked to Max about his perspective on Canada, I asked him, what do you see happening before 2030 for you in relation to what you see in Canada? And his answer was that he would like to see Canada or the People's Party attain 6 to 12% of the vote electorally across the nation. And in 2030, his plan was to retire. Now, he may have changed his mind, but that's what he said. That's date stamped November of 2023. That's what I heard. And when I asked him about post-nationalism, there didn't seem to be a concern that post-nationalism would mean that we wouldn't have a democracy to actually engage kind of the voice of the people with regard to what our governance is.
Right.
So that was a concern for me. And I think the bigger and deeper concern for me within the libertarian discussion is that, libertarianism is about really the elevation of freedom. It's about the elevation of self. And what happens in discussions around libertarianism, or what libertarianism means, is that there seems to be a disconnect between responsibility, duty, conscience, and we just talk about freedom and not the things that have actually made our country endure and prevail in the last 250, 200 years. We had people that went overseas to contend and fight against evil, shed their blood and die because they stood up for truth. They stood up for justice for others. They stood up for uprightness against crooked evil in the world. And so I just think of the example. There was an MP candidate within the PPC in 2021. I think if my memory serves me correctly, it was David Yeo, Yeo, and he ran for the PPC party in the 2021 election. And when I review that candidate and his campaign, he campaigned for freedom. Yet right after that election, it came out that he was actually one of the contractors that was working on the ArriveCan app, and the company that he was a principal shareholder of or director of was paid nearly $7 million to write and create an app that would actually put Canadians into bondage if they disagreed with the government policy about their bodily autonomy being violated by not taking the vaccine, or
Right.
by being forced or coerced to do it. And
Right.
so that's not freedom. That's just freedom without responsibility. And maybe some will say that's just an anecdotal piece. But the thing about libertarianism, I think, for me, is that many Canadians understand that we've moved beyond politics in our discussions. We're actually talking about good and evil now.
Yeah.
And I believe that it was interesting, actually, Jordan Peterson's observation about good and evil. He said, I never really. I'm thinking about his when he came to Edmonton. He spoke about this, and he said, what actually helped me to begin to believe in the source of good, or God, was the evil that I saw in the world. That's what's actually pointed him, as I understand it, what he was saying, pointed him to the knowledge of God, or the knowledge of evil. And so, if we see, we're looking at our country, and we're moving very quickly to the normalization of, or the attempt to normalize, pedophilia in our country, things that we would all draw a line and fight and die for, to protect a child from being sexually violated. These things are advancing, and it's within the Canadian conscience to call them evil. And yet we're having these discussions about good and evil, but we're not actually framing our discussion. And this goes right into this discussion about libertarianism. If we can't actually stop and say something is wrong because it's evil, then we put ourselves in a position where everything is relative.
Right.
And this is really the challenge with libertarianism, because my question is, how do you actually fight against evil if you don't believe that light or good, a source of good, actually exists? And
Right.
this is the problem with the deification of self, or the humanistic root system within a libertarian position. And I know that sounds all very philosophical, but if you actually believe that uh, God is light and God is the source of goodness, and you then look at the evil that our nation's facing, and you examine our constitution, and you see that it says our nation's built upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law, which has built a great country, and you seeing it being taken away, why would you link into a libertarian thought framework that simply says we can't contest against evil with any knowledge of the source of good?
Right. Right.
Huge. It's a huge philosophical issue. So for me, that is the answer as to why I simply didn't engage with the PPC, because I can never see that question answered. How do you say you're libertarian and then not actually have a stand against abortion, or
Right.
or some kind of law that would impede abortion?
Right.
These are the questions that we've got to are kind of find ourselves rooted into as we talk about these things
Yeah.
for Canada, and Canadians will need to decide what this looks like uh, as and when we move to an election.
Yeah, Grant, that is so insightful. And I think a lot of people really, don't understand the differentiation between, what that libertarian, human secularism kind of foundation is. And, you can't take a faith response and try and bolt it onto the side and kind of try and make that work. So no, thank you. Very insightful. I think that's very helpful. Another question that's come up, and I mean, this is kind of the underdog question, is, people respond in ways as, why should I waste my time and vote on an underdog? They're so afraid that Justin Trudeau isn't going to be removed, and that they're afraid to vote on, out of a consciousness and a conscious value system, uh, you know, to turn things around. And so they ask, like, does the United Party of Canada, do they have a set of, policies? Do they have a party constitution in place? Uh, that people could kind of follow up and look and read and see if this is something that resonates with them, for kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, the policies broadly are on our website right now. It's www.unitedpartyofcanada.ca.
Yeah.
Note the .ca, not .com.
Yeah.
There was about 15 years ago, there was a prior iteration of the United Party of Canada. It didn't have anything to do with me. It was a name that was used. I didn't realize that when that name was chosen. And so there's still some kind of a drift website out there that is from that era. But if you go to the .ca site that I've just cited, you'll find an outline of our policies with regard to our constitution for the party. That is in the final days of being finished right now. It's being reviewed by lawyers, and we expect that will be out in days, not perhaps weeks, a few weeks.
Okay.
That is, I mean, I expect that'll be on our website, let's say for sure by Christmas, if not before.
Okay.
We're moving very quickly to do that. We'll be doing our first AGM in the new year, and we're working on those pieces. I think that this question again, in some ways, we've kind of maybe hit it already, but this question of engaging a new party, I think there's some pieces that I need to comment on. We have been working now for very nearly 2 years across the country.
Yes.
We have teams that have been built from British Columbia right through to Nova Scotia.
Yes.
And we have candidates from BC, the Yukon, and right across the prairies that are in the process of being approved to run in the next general election whenever that happens. We're eligible to do that. So there, it may be that because you haven't seen this spoken to in the press, people don't, legitimately say they don't know who Grant Abraham is or the United Party. Fair enough. But we are going to have candidates, and we're seeing candidates come and ask us, and we're beginning the process weekly. To your question before, and maybe in the last question, I didn't get to answer it because of all the other things that I was speaking to. But, my view is that there's a lot of really good people inside the Conservative Party that have been repressed. Their principles are being repressed, and they're kind of having to coexist, and maybe with a great discomfort or a value dissonance internally. I don't know how long people can actually do that, given the fact that the biggest issues are not being spoken to by the party.
Right.
Every current MP right now in Canada has to take stock of what it is they are there to steward on behalf of the Canadian people. And
Yeah.
I'd even say under God as well, in terms of what this nation's supposed to be about. And my own view is the Conservative Party is a ship that is not seaworthy to serve the Canadian people, but there are still good sailors on it. And I
Yeah.
think this discussion lends itself to, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in these days. We'll see what happens when we understand how many of these names come out from this commission's report in terms of foreign influence, with up to 60 of our current MPs. And
Right.
how has that been tolerated or managed within the current leadership of the Conservative Party even? And
Right.
why is that being repressed in the way that it is? I'm not convinced it's just the Liberal Party
Right.
that is the case.
Right.
I
I would
read an
agree.
article this morning from the BBC about a very clear statement, and it was interesting to see it from the BBC because they're very left orientated in the UK, but they were talking about the clear correlation between safe and effective vaccine treatments and people's lives being destroyed. It's interesting that this discussion is coming out now. We have a situation in Canada where all of the existing legacy parties actively encourage Canadians to take that treatment
Right.
when there was such a huge survival rate from COVID-19? And was that really necessary and proportionate? And we're going to have to deal with those issues. The National Citizens Inquiry did an amazing job pointing to the information to show Canadians what the actual causal links were between the vaccine and harm to Canadians. We need to deal with that. We need the truth told
We
about
do. We
that.
do. We
So
do.
there's so many things, and I'm interested to see what MPs actually had interests in businesses that profited
Yes.
from
Yes.
COVID-19,
Or family
directly
members.
or indirectly.
Yeah.
And if they did do that, uh, there's a duty there to serve the Canadian people first, not perhaps in your own interests or interests that you're connected with via third parties. So
Yeah.
Canada's crying out for truth, and we're
Yeah.
not actually going to be able to heal until the truth is told. And
Yeah.
Canada's hurting. And until we actually deal with these issues, this kind of deep-seated frustration that we're seeing across the country is not going to be alleviated. And that's
Yes.
why we cannot have these band-aid conversations.
Yeah.
And that's why these people that say, well, why would we take a risk on the fringe party or whatever? Why would we split the vote? Look at what the NDP and the Liberal government have done as a minority government. They have completely changed or tried to change the actual DNA and root system of what our nation is
That's
as a
right.
minority government. Could you imagine, even if a new party like the United Party of Canada had 5 or 10 or 15 MPs, and we became the neck that turned the head of a prime minister who was in a supply management agreement with us?
Yeah. Yeah. It would
There'd
be
be a
much different.
contending for the truth.
Yeah.
So the biggest problem that we have right now is the fact that these issues aren't being discussed in Canada, that the Conservative Party is completely omitting to engage these deeper issues, and anybody that may try to speak to them is being muted,
Yeah.
to the point that the party actually looks complicit in the selling out of the nation.
Yeah. I
And I'm
agree.
not prepared. I'm not prepared to let this country go down the toilet with these kinds of omissions.
Right.
So if you're a voter out there and you are, then that's on you. But this is an opportunity to have the real conversations that we need to have and actually look deeper, because everybody has a niggling knowledge out there that there's something is deeper, and there's graver concerns about what's actually going on in the country.
Yeah. Thank you, Grant. I mean, that's very well said. Another big question here for you, and this is another whole, I could do a whole show just on this one. But I know that you've had some very significant meetings with some of Canada's First Peoples, from the Inuit, hereditary chiefs that, from different parts of Canada. And, I know that, there's a very sensitive thing unfolding with the UNDRIP towards, First Nation lands, and what that means to the risk that it puts, on our First Peoples. And I guess I just would want to open up, if you could share a few comments relating to the evolving relationship that you see forming between the United Party of Canada and the First Peoples of Canada. Can
Yeah.
you share there?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a vision that Canada would be one people, one blood, and one nation together. And in order to do that, we actually need to find the true pathway and heart of reconciliation with our First Peoples. And as I've spoken with First Peoples across the country, I see a recognition with them that they are a host people and that they have a heart to welcome. The challenge in our history has been that there was a dishonoring in that relationship.
Yeah.
And that is why we have the tension and the frustrations that we have in this country, and why many people feel that just simply paying more money is never going to bring the reconciliation that we actually need. And so this is another one of those deep conversations. But what I've observed as I've met with leaders of the Indigenous peoples in our country, from the Inuit right down to the different tribes and even to the Métis, is that there's a desire for true reconciliation. I was invited to come and attend a meeting of many tribal leaders. It was an international meeting, but there were many, many Indigenous leaders from different groups in Canada. I spoke at this conference in May, and I was very honored to be taken through a ceremony that was led by the chief of the Inuit people. And it was really a blessing in their Indigenous way to empower me to lead and to take a step of leadership in this country.
Wow.
And that was unexpected in so many ways. I'm still trying to understand the significance of that on many levels, of what that meant for our land, with the Indigenous people as the gatekeepers on our land, if you will, in the way that they articulate their spiritual authority. And so I felt very honored by that experience, and I'm looking forward to partnering with them as we ramp up towards the national election. Because if I'm talking about Canada becoming one people, one blood, one nation, not this fragmented, disunified, amorphous of people that are self-obsessing about individual rights, get back to actually building a united nation, a nation together, one people, one blood, one nation.
Yeah.
It's going to be vital, imperative that our First Peoples come along on this journey and be honored. And this is I suppose for me, it's sickening, because when I look deeper into what I think is happening and what I see happening, and even what I see Indigenous legal scholars talking about when they're analyzing it, whether their voice is heard on this or not, I don't know. But in so many ways, UNDRIP is going to be a betrayal.
Yes.
Because what's ultimately happening is that land is being the title is passing of Canadian land to the different tribes under UNDRIP, and there's a management agreement being set up. In the event that there's a defaulting of the finances or governance of that arrangement, that, as I understand it, that title of that land will then cede to the United Nations, not back to Canada.
Wow.
And so,
Oof.
in so many ways, I'm not
Wow.
sure if our Indigenous brothers and sisters fully understand that. I know that some of them do. And if it happens, it will be a huge betrayal. From my perspective, it fits hand in glove into the agenda that I see unpacking in Agenda 2030, the discussion around post-nationalism, why we're seeing our rights migrated away from our elected government to unelected UN officials. And this is what post-nationalism is about. It's about essentially making us technocratic feudal vassals.
Yeah.
And this is a long way away from what the intent and design of Canada is supposed to be or was built to be. And so these are the threats to our nation now. And we need to be talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on UNDRIP. I've done cursory research on it, but it certainly fits into the agenda to dispossess us from our wealth, our ownership, and our understanding of owning property and passing wealth to our families.
Yeah.
Which are part of the values that have built the nation.
Yeah.
Is that our understanding that we can come here as immigrants. We've all come as immigrants, and we can build, we can work hard, we can study, we can prosper, we can buy a piece of land, we can build a house, we can settle, we can grow stuff, we can have neighbors, and we can live in peace together. This migration towards urbanized 15-minute cities And this discussion is the rolling back of that vision. It's just being presented to us as a carrot right
Mhm.
now,
Mhm.
and it's deeply concerning in relation to what it means uh, in relation to the core values of property, ownership, rights, and the value system that built the nation.
Mhm.
That's why we feel jarred and unsettled, and people are asking, "Where's our country gone?"
Right.
Because there's a force at work that's deconstructing what we understand in our nation.
Right. Right. No, it's probably much farther along than most Canadians realize. And so, I mean, I'm thankful that men like you are standing up to defend the nation and get the nation back. Now, another question, and this is actually a bit
Can
of
I
a,
can I
yeah,
just before you go there? Sorry, Barry, to
yep,
interrupt you.
that's
One
okay.
of one of the core principles in terms of what my macro policy would be in leading this country would be to dismantle that post-national agenda at all levels of government
Okay.
and actually push authority and the power back down to the people at the grassroots.
Okay.
We
I
have
love
a
that.
we have a largely bloated system, and people are being disconnected from what their rights are, and it's a
Mm.
tragedy.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, Canadians need to hear that. They need to hear that. And as from my understanding, I don't think anyone else is talking, in that blunt of terms. Um, now Canada, we're a nation that is, blessed uh, with natural resources of, you know, literally, we're kind of one of the world's bread baskets. And I look at our Canadian agriculture and the Canadian farmers, and, they put food on our table every day. And, our beef and poultry producers, and the pressures that they've been under over the last few years with increased carbon taxing, increased costs, higher regulations on every side. And I think they've been hard hit over the last few years as well. And then we see in the grocery store when you go and buy a couple of steaks or a roast beef. I mean, you see it in the grocery stores. I guess my question is, when you look at a nation that is largely founded on with an agricultural base, what would you say to, and I want to thank and honor the farmers within our country, because do you know what? Without you, we would all be in trouble. And so I just want to honor the farmers and families that do serve us. But Grant, do you have any comments or things you could offer uh, to those folks?
Well, I mean, you're right. My family were homesteaders in Saskatchewan. That's my own stock. I understand what it takes to grow animals to be sold into the supply chain. How much work that takes. Farmers are underpaid for the work that they put in. There is a move to remove the supply management agreements in Canada that will, many people say it'll make farming more efficient. I see food security as a huge issue for our nation, so we can actually sustain our own population and feed it. We've got to protect our farmers. I think we need to protect those supply management agreements until there's a time when we can do it better. We are going to have to look at those supply management agreements in relation to our relationship with a U.S. administration that hopefully will be just as well, and take a lot of care to ensure that our land is protected. We should only have farmland owned by Canadians. And if they are Canadian corporates, there should be a majority of Canadian ownership. We shouldn't be allowing our farmland to lie idle because there's foreign owners that just leaving it fallow. We need to look at our food supply chains. We need to move towards innovation. We need to ensure that our processing factories aren't being reduced, and we can actually get our product to the shelves. We need to cut the carbon tax because that's such a multi-layer tax on fuel, on tractor fuel, on the movement of feed. It just goes on and on and on. Start making it efficient for farmers to actually produce the food we need and get our food prices down. Food security, I can't stress it enough. For the security of our nation, we've got to have food security, which means we've got to take care of our farmers. And that should be a very loud message right across, our fisheries industry, our agricultural industry, and our energy industry as well. Not that it's bolted into agriculture, but this food piece is huge. And Canada has quality food, and there's a lot of food innovation out there. I mean, this is a sub conversation, but we need to encourage entrepreneurs in the food industry and move away, or move towards, not away, move towards also developing, niche products. And there's great food innovation in Canada that we need to encourage the entrepreneurial side of to bring to the world, because we have amazing food and amazing producers.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that, Grant. Moving on, I know that the United Party of Canada has an initiative across Canada in regards to an emergency community response network. And I guess my question is, what can you tell us about that? How do people get involved? What's this? What's this about? I see it on your website. Saw you share that out. And I think people in Canada, particularly in the environment we're in right now, I guess maybe share what you can to give us kind of a framework for that, and your thoughts towards that, and why people should get involved.
Well, the Emergency Community Response Network is really a designed model that we've been the beneficiaries of in so many ways, because in my travels across the country, I have met in every province all of the people that, in the event that there was a national emergency or a regional emergency that was not being supported by the government, those would be the people that would kick into gear and actually take care of our nation or preserve it in the event of some other threat that would seek to destabilize or undermine our nation. It's been interesting to me because I see these people, patriots, all. I see our media wanting to label them as let's use cliche terms that Trudeau has used, a fringe minority, or they've been labeled as far right extremists. They're not. They're bread and butter, everyday Canadians that love this country, and they've been a bit scared to put their head above the parapet. And yet, if a problem really was created, they would be the ones that would actually help protect and defend this nation in the event that there wasn't a response that was appropriate from the government. And so that sounds a little radical, but when you look at some of the situations that have arisen recently, in situations where you see firefighters turn back from Jasper who were willing to help but were told they'd be arrested if they tried, one has to scratch one's head and say, why is that the case? And in that case, the town was left to burn. If it's human life that is involved, that's a very different discussion, and one that will not necessarily always have cool heads responding to those kinds of situations. And so I think what the Emergency Community Response Network really is it's creating a hub for Canadians to be able to talk, and for some of these groups to begin to be able to communicate. It also, I think what we want to do is be able to help people, those groups, find each other and be able to talk to each other in the event that we did have a weather phenomena that caused our grid to go down, or there were other events that happened where we were out of power, or there was some other threat that happened to our country. So we want to make those connections. I think that's what good government does. I can't I can't say, as I have on this interview already, that we want to push responsibility and power back down to the people and not actually model that from a pre-government platform. And that's what that is. In so many ways, the actual framework of the ECRN, the Emergency Community Response Network, is to provide a network hub to allow the leaders of these different communities across the country that don't know each other and maybe are a bit scared to actually, put their head above the. They're not putting how they feel on Facebook these days, but
Right.
they do care about this country, and they will help their neighbors. And we actually may need to pull together at some point as a nation, and we need to know who we are across the country. And that's what part of this is. And in so many ways, this is part of the grassroots patriot movement. That is what makes our country amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's this labeling is ridiculous and unfair. So that's what it is. It's simple as humanitarian connections that will preserve our nation and ensure that it endures.
Well, thank you, Grant, I mean, that helps a lot. And I would encourage, those that are watching this to go on the website and to click in there. There's a spot, I think, where they can email in and connect into that group. So yeah, I pray that Canadians from coast to coast would engage in that. Another thing that I look at, Grant, is as crazy as this nation is right now, in inflation, just over the charts, and how difficult those on fixed incomes, are having it. And I think of our senior citizens, those who, sorry, uh, those seniors that actually labored and built Canada. And right now, many of them are having, a hard time making ends meet. And so I guess my question to you would be, is there anything that senior citizens in Canada, anything that they need to hear from you, or anything you would like to share with them?
Well, I think a lot of our senior citizens have been part of the generation that helped build this country, or they're the immediate children of homesteaders, certainly in Western Canada, and they know what it took to make this country work. And I think the first thing that I'd say to all of them is that we're not going to drop the ball in terms of the preservation of this country and what it is that we've been endeavoring to build here. That ball's not going to be dropped. And the other pieces, I mean, these economic pieces that impact fixed income people, there needs to be real relief brought in terms of bringing the cost of items down, inflationary impact on items to be reduced. We can really easily do that in relation to opening up our energy sector. We can do that by cutting the taxes. We can do it by ensuring that our old folks in this country are actually honored and cared for.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the impact. I don't know. I have parents that are still a household in BC and living, and I know that they're impacted by the cost of living and the cost of groceries. We need to get our costs down, and we'll do that by starting to unleash our energy sector again. We'll do that by getting rid of some of these layered taxes that push prices up. But Canadians have to recognize, all Canadians, and this just isn't a question for old folks. We have a world right now where the fiat currencies in this global reality are under severe, severe pressure. The U.S. dollar has been removed as the peg for the oil standard. There are currencies in the world right now, the financial world, that have moved away from being connected to the oil reserve price. They've moved to gold backed. Um, the the durability of our fiat currencies and its ability to persist, and the way that we've understood the value of our money, I'm not clear it's going to last very much longer. Our government right now can't even tell us how much precise debt we're in or where some of our debt was spent. So the question is, do we really know where we're at in terms of our deficit? And how much longer can we keep printing money? So I think we've got to be able to tell Canadians about the reality of our exposure in relation to the fiat currency, and it's not outside the scope of reality. When you look even at Greece a few years ago, where they had a bail-in, it's called a bail-in if you want to search that up, and basically the banks simply said, well, look, any of the money that's sitting in your account, we're just going to basically freeze. We're going to give you that value in another form, but you're not going to be able to spend it for so many years. And people were restricted to 85 or 75 euros per day to take out of their bank machines. That was it. And they had to figure out how to make that work.
Wow.
That's not 100 years ago. That's like 12, 14 years ago. And so that was when the European central banks basically said to Greece, you know, your ability to pay your debt has run out. And where are we in that matrix? Where's the United States in that? And they have nearly $37 trillion in debt. So we have banks failing in the U.S. We just had this week the Toronto Dominion in the U.S. to be found to be creating, what was the quote I heard? Creating a culture of crime with regard to money laundering in the U.S. I think I'm quoting that right.
Yes.
And have now got a $3 billion penalty to pay in the U.S. Why is that bank being allowed to have Canadians' hard-earned dollars in their deposit accounts in Canada when that's what they're doing? Right. So we need to do some serious financial reform. You know, I think it's very interesting as well. We had the Liberal Party announce to us that there was going to be, you know, move towards digital currencies. And now, out of the blue, we've had the Canadian, the federal bank in Canada, the Bank of Canada, tell us that they're moving away from digital currencies. I find it very interesting that the Bank of Canada is telling us that. And why aren't the Liberals telling us that?
Right.
And I think that we've got some serious change coming towards us. And it's so much bigger than just talking about monetary or fiscal policy or where interest rates are at. And so, you know, I think Canadians need to buckle up, and they need to be prepared to listen deeper and listen for the truth being spoken to them, because it's not what's going to necessarily tickle your ear just so you can put your vote out there. Like what you are hearing now from the Conservatives, and we're basically talking to a conservative crowd in Canada. You're hearing, you know, we need to get back to common sense conservatism, and we need to, you know, axe the tax. Our issues in our nation are so much more profound than that, and Canadians need to and deserve to be told the truth. Yeah. And until we actually wade into these issues and say, you know, things could be a lot worse than just having expensive groceries or expensive electricity. But we're a tough people. We actually are a very tough people, and we need it straight. And I think this is part of the conversation that Canadians need to have. And if you just want to be, you know, superficial and put your head in the sand and hope that by not splitting the vote or not taking a risk on a new party that all these problems are going to go away, go ahead. Because I think what's happening is we're going to, in the event that Canadians don't look deeply and they don't actually engage this at a deeper heart, spirit level and look at what's going on, we'll end up with a conservative government, and we're going to be in the same position in terms of losing our sovereignty, just slightly slower. Yeah. And hear me, I'm not saying that every conservative MP is trying to steal your sovereignty. What I'm saying is that the Conservative Party is enabling it by what it's not doing. And I think there's a lot of good conservatives out there that are probably having to bite their tongue an awful lot. And the question for all of them is, how long can you do that until you're deemed to be complicit in the selling out of the nation?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that couldn't be better said. Would you, here's a question for you.
But can I just say, can I just, I'm just thinking about something there that I heard. I heard an interview, sorry, Barry, I heard an interview
Go.
there, and President Trump was being interviewed by Fox News. And the interviewer said to him, um, what do you see? You know, they were talking about the threat to the U.S. and she said to us something like, "What is the threat to the U.S.?" And she goes, and she actually referenced it. They said there's 50,000 migrant Chinese men of military age that are in the U.S. He goes, "Yeah, these are challenges. He totally skipped over that reference to the 50,000 uh, young men of military age, and he said our biggest threat to our nation is the enemy within.
Right.
And we have an enemy within Canada that is selling it out. And
Yeah.
we're going along, whistling along, thinking that the government that we grew up with as kids, where we talk about peace, order, and good government, and we trusted our government, that those days are gone. There's actually a betrayal happening of what the home and hearths of this nation are. And people need to see that. The fact that the Conservative Party there may be some good people in there, does not mean that they aren't facilitating the undermining of our nation. And this is a whole conversation on its own. There's a litany of issues that they should have been, pulling their hair out over or protesting in Parliament years ago, and they just haven't.
Hmm.
And one has to ask, why not? Why didn't they speak to post nationalism? Why haven't they been on road shows across the nation explaining what that means and explaining why it was that the UK left the European Union? This is a huge issue. It's the root system of the movement towards globalism and away from our understanding of of God, family, community, province, and nation. And we got to look at that closely. Everything else will spin out of that conversation. Okay, sorry.
Hey! I mean, I know that I've got a good one for you. The question is, would you do a live debate with Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, and if so, who would be a good moderator? Jordan Peterson, Tucker Carlson, or Don Cherry? Should
Well,
should
the answer is yes. And I
should it
think,
be a public attended event, live audience, or should it be done from a controlled studio? And what would it take to make that happen?
no, I think that we need to have the gloves off and actually have this conversation because the our nation is gagging for the truth. And if it was Tucker or Jordan Peterson or Don Cherry, I think we'd all be well served with any of them or all of them. But
Hmm.
let's have the conversation.
Hmm.
We need to
Hmm.
have those conversations.
I'd
Right
like to.
now,
Yeah.
everything is so sanitized and controlled, and the issues just aren't being spoken to. Why? From the conservative side, well, they're trying to curate themselves towards a win in the election, and they just don't want to talk about issues that are awkward. They don't want to talk about uh, the how compatible militant Islam with our Canadian values. They don't want to talk about anti-Semitism. Pierre Poilievre has flip-flopped on the impact of immigration in relation to the access to housing or housing prices. All of these issues are so curated so that they don't blow themselves up before an election. But
Hmm.
we need to be talking about this stuff and
Hmm.
more.
Hmm.
I mean, there's other things that I mean, you're touching on
Well, I
some of
mean,
these issues here today.
well, we talked a little bit, when we talked about the agriculture. I did have a question about Canadian energy and the oil gas sector, and a healthy, relationship federally with, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and that, and much like the farmers. I mean, we need great reform, in that area too. But
Well,
yeah, so I don't know if you
I
want to
was
take
gonna.
a minute to
Well, I
speak
do.
into
I
that.
do. I mean, I'm a Western Canadian, and there's been a lot of talk our whole lifetime about equalization payments and what that means and electoral reform. But if you go back into our constitutional history and you read the Westminster Act in 1931, it made it very clear there was a ceding of sovereign authority from Westminster in England to Canada, and that authority passed to the provinces, not necessarily to the federal government. And we've had a, a tipsy turvy happen where we've got a federal control mechanism that has reigned supreme and is actually controlling the provincial authority by the payments that they disperse, whether it's for healthcare or whatever. And that's how these policies are being advanced. And there's some real questions here that we've got to be discussing about how much money Western Canada has been sending east. We don't want to be a colony of a colony anymore in the west of Canada.
No,
And the amount of money that we have sent, I think the subsidization to Quebec, if my memory serves me right, since 1962 is like it's nearly $700 billion. And I don't know how many we've done. Yes, Western Canada is a hardworking wealth basket, but we've got to create a scenario in Canada where those provinces that are creating wealth aren't subsidizing or encouraging other provinces not to innovate or to grow. And so this is a real conversation for Canada and that no one wants to have.
hmm
And how do we do that when we have a situation in our nation when we have one province that's actually making it illegal to speak English in their province at the same time that their lifestyle and their budget is being floated by Western Canada.
right,
So
right,
these are the conversations.
yeah,
Yes, we want Quebec, Canada. Yes, we celebrate Quebec. Yes, the connection with Quebecers and Canada was totally strengthened as a result of the convoy. I saw
yeah,
it myself, and so
yeah,
that's not. This is not to create a Western alienation or a Western perspective on separation. I'm not really there at all. I want to see our nation strong together
yeah,
from sea to sea, and but we've got to deal and discuss these kinds of issues together, right? Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's it's past time.
Oh
It's
yeah.
past time.
Well, it is. I've got another big one for you. I mean, I'm kind of opening up all these cans for these conversations, and I mean, each one of them you could just delve into. But first of all, I just want to thank all our all our Canadian military servicemen that have served our nation. Thank you for your service. My father-in-law was in the Navy. He signed up at 16 years old. He had to get permission from his parents to sign in and go join the Navy during the Second World War. But our military now in Canada is a mess. I mean, it is just such a shame. I mean, from my understanding, they lost a third of their members through COVID, and then a lot of them kind of left because of a lot of the current administration policies that they brought in regard to gender issues and things. And I mean, I know morale is at an all-time low. I think I read a statistic that they're down about 16,000 members right now from their lowest kind of number that they thought was operable. They've got 50-year-old jets protecting our north, which is 40% of Canada's landmass. I'm told that we've got only three frigates that are seaworthy. Over 50% of the iron tanks, carriers, these kind of things are basically inoperable in mothballs in a lot right now. And, right now you don't need to write an entrance exam to get in, nor do you have to be a Canadian citizen. I mean, I digress. But Grant, a couple of things. What do you think What do you think the biggest threat to Canada is right now? And what are your comments in regard to our Canadian military?
Well, we've been shirking our responsibility in Canada for decades in terms of our contribution to our military and those that serve for us overseas. It's actually a tragedy what we haven't put into the military. It's been completely underfunded. We're supposed to be paying 2% of our GDP in relation to our NATO membership. I think we're struggling to get past 1.1%. I don't think we've reached 1.3%, to be honest. It's a huge issue. I think that there are now big issues with the Arctic. Those sea lanes are opening, and we need to be able to. They're not just sea lanes; they're actually areas where territorial Canada is on both sides of the waterways, and we can't actually protect our sea lanes or even control them. And so the north is an issue. We've got predatory states who are interested in wealth that's beneath the northern seas, oil. Um, we aren't in a position really to defend ourselves at all. And this is something that needs a strong look and a strong shoulder to support it and to get our military back to strip out this ridiculous DEI stuff and actually create a force that's fit to fight and to serve with honor as it has done for generations in our nation. And so it's a tragedy what has happened. My own family served in the Canadian Air Force and in the infantry in World War II. One died, and the other one was wounded, and so I just think it's a part of who we are as Canadians. We need to empower our soldiery again in this nation, and we need to be able to defend against threats. I'm going to use an American term because it's so good. Threats that are foreign and domestic. And we have
Yeah.
situations right now where there was legislation passed back in the 90s. One of the pieces of legislation is the Foreign Interference Protection Act, which gives the right of foreign governments to use their own troops to defend their foreign assets in Canada that have been investments in Canada.
Wow.
And there are military individuals with military training and/or existing soldiers that are in this country, and really we need to tidy up what is within our own nation. I don't know that Canadians know the half of it with the immigration, the illegal immigration that's come into this country. We're not even clear. I know when I talk to Americans, they are deeply concerned about what is being hosted in this country that Canadians may not even be aware of. And
Mhm.
so even our relationship with our brother, the United States of America, is something that we're going to need to do some work to steward to ensure that we're a robust part of the defense of North America, the continent of North America. And we're way, way below what our thresholds should be. And we need to really get back to it. This thing that you've talked about is the development of this fast pass mechanism for the Canadian Armed Forces, where they're allowing the criteria that you articulated there were right. You don't have to be a Canadian citizen. The entry tests that are required, you do either after you enter, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you pass it or not. And you don't. If I remember correctly, I don't even think you are required to have to speak either English or French. It's not one
Right.
or the other. You don't have to speak either. You maybe just learn.
Yeah.
So we could have a situation where we could have a national crisis in this country, and we could have Canadian soldiers deployed who aren't even Canadians, where Canadian citizenry have to step aside because of the implicit authority of our military. And I'm not sure that is where we want to be when you look at some of the threats that Canada is under right now. So I'm deeply concerned. I mean, if you listen to my comments here today, I'm essentially saying that our government has been selling out our nation and creating policies that actually destabilize the homogeny of our country and what our nation is. And so, how much further is it going to go than our flag being burned on the street with with people baying for the destruction of Israel, a leading proponent of security in the Middle East, and in fact, one of the key pieces on the international chessboard, keeping much of the violence away from North America.
Mhm.
And I'm just astonished at the online conversations that I see in terms of the passive disloyalty that I see towards Israel from within Canada. It's been historically our aligned ally and a democratic state that we've been in partnership and allied with. And there's an equivocation that's going on right now in Canada that I can't believe that I'm actually seeing. So there's a lot of threats, and we are definitely connected and interconnected into the US. If
Yeah.
maybe some viewers here that'll be listening to this interview don't remember, the 80s and the impact of the US economy impacting our Canadian dollar, and what that looked like. We are intimately connected with the U.S. economy, and if the U.S. economy nosedives or there's a serious downgrading of the U.S. dollar, it's going to impact our ability to spend, and we'll see inflation get worse. So, the interesting thing, just going back briefly to that interview with Donald Trump on Fox, was that the interviewer was talking to Trump about the existence of Chinese migrants slash militants in the U.S. And I'm not at all sure that in Canada we don't have the same issue.
Yeah.
So we better be having these conversations, especially when we've got up to 60 MPs that are actually the beneficiaries of foreign gratuity to create foreign influence in our nation, and there are elected MPs.
Mhm.
Well, what
Yeah.
are we doing?
Yeah. No, no, that's very, very good, Grant. Well, what would you, on that note, what would you say to if you had opportunity, or even right now, to share, what would you say to President Trump in America and to our American brothers and sisters down there?
Well, what I see with the Americans is that they are standing up to take back their country. They're identifying what the actual threats are. Canada needs to be standing with this standard in relation to truth and justice and freedom and uprightness again in our nation. We're your brother. We want to stand with you. And the compromises that we've seen in relation to what has been allowed to go on has happened in our nation as well. And there is a movement within Canada that wants to rectify this and restructure this country so that we can stand as the true north, strong and free, bravely and boldly with our American brothers. And that's where we need to get to in Canada again. And that's what my hope, my message would be to President Trump, to hear that Canada has not been compromised so much so that there's no patriots that aren't actually afraid to step up to the line and defend it.
Wow.
We'll do that.
Wow. Thank you, Grant. They need to hear that. They need to know that. Uh, Next question. What would you say to the premiers across Canada? Is there anything that you would have that you would share with them as a future prime minister?
Yeah, I think the original vision for Canada in its framework was to see the provinces be much more. Um, when I look at the framework of our Constitution, Section 91 and 92, Our nation was designed to be governed by provincial leadership, with the exception of the things that were in Section 91, which was the federal authority given to the federal government. I'd like to see those powers pushed back to the provinces, and so that each province can control the things that it needs to control by the people that live there, including how much immigration comes to the province, including how they do healthcare, how they run their schools, and leave the things that are better served by the federal government to the federal government. Things like intellectual property, things like our military, things like the protection of our borders, things like our macro immigration policy for what it looks like to enter the country. This is the way that our nation was actually intended to function. And what's happening now is a constant war and negotiation and games essentially running between the federal government and the provincial leadership. And so we need to really look at that. We also need to look at the interprovincial trade barriers that exist so that Canada can be a free trade zone with itself, so that the Canadians, can be beneficiaries of that. There's much work to be done on those. The protectionism that has existed is not beneficial to Canadians. There are some provinces that are the policies have undermined them. When I look at the history of the Maritimes, I see the Maritimes before Confederation as a thriving business enterprise. The provinces were wealthy, and because of the relative size of Quebec and Ontario, there were policies set up that actually created a dependency in the Maritimes on the federal government. We want to get back to all Canadians being empowered regionally to be able to thrive. And so that means that we need to move towards a less centralized government and a shrunken federal government in a way that's incrementally responsible for that transition and will foster the growth in our nation. We must look at that.
Wow. Well, I would encourage, those that are watching, and I know this is going to get into the hands of provincial leaders, and I would encourage those direct conversations with Grant, that they would reach out and connect with him and have, some of these discussions around these things. So thank you for that, Grant. Uh, Another thing that I wanted to talk about is recently Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are refusing to hand over documents in an RCMP investigation, and this isn't the first time that they've done this. So I guess what do you think needs to be done to get this dealt with in the right way? What do you have to say about the justice system in Canada? And I'll talk about, I say, what do you think about the RCMP in Canada? Are they the same organization that they were created to be? This all kind of ties into the same pot here. And so, anyway, no, and we're in a nation that has a drug epidemic, taking out so many lives right now. Uh, I mean, poverty, homelessness, all of these things. So I guess I would just throw out a couple of those things to you to hear your heart and perspective.
Well, this discussion about parliamentary procedure, it's not just this SDTC thing that is currently being discussed in Canada, and why the Liberal government won't pass the documents into the House for scrutiny. This issue in terms of parliamentary process goes back further, because this Royal Commission that was, I'm not sure, maybe it wasn't a Royal Commission, this committee that was formed to assess the degree of foreign interference with sitting MPs, it found that there were up to 60 MPs that were under the influence of foreign organizations, agencies, or actors, or whatever. But they won't disclose who they are to the Canadian public. Now, we have some big problems even legally because our Minister of Justice or Attorney General is supposed to be actually neutral, not just be party policy based, not be partisan to the Liberal Party, and that's his name is Mr. Varani. He really should have been engaging that as with a neutral hat of the Attorney General, but that's not happening. We're in this ridiculous and untenable position where we're drifting towards an election, and there's 60 of our MPs that are under foreign influence.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
just ridiculous. So it shouldn't be any surprise if you look at that scenario to think that the Liberals are playing this game now in terms of not releasing the information. No doubt there's ridiculous amounts of money that have been paid to whatever friends or family or benefactors or people, even if it's just a question of value. Those things are obviously being discussed. We've seen it, some of those discussions on some of the committee clips we see on YouTube or whatever. But I really do wonder if, when I look at this, I believe we're watching theater because there's 35 days that's given. I think it was October 2nd that the Parliament got essentially went into recess so that bills couldn't be advanced until such time as these documents were provided. I'm pretty sure that takes us right up to the point of the U.S. election. I think that there are a lot of issues right now that are going on with things that again are impolite to talk about, or people don't want to talk about, or will
Yeah.
categorize as conspiracy theory that are coming out of the U.S. I think that Trump coming into the presidency again is going to be uh, a big deal in terms of the full story being told about what's going on with foreign policy, what's been really going on in terms of what the globalist agenda has been against nations like Canada or the UK or the United States or Australia or New Zealand. And I think that these next few days are going to be very interesting. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that while there's rules within that game of parliament that we're looking at right now in Canada, I think that there are other forces that are at play, and this is a wait and see period. And I don't actually think the issue is whether the Liberals are going to release those documents. I think that other steps will be taken. I think that the Speaker of the House is a Liberal MP, and I think that they may well find other channels to, either they prorogue, maybe they change the leader of the Liberal Party and bring Mark Carney in, something like that. I just don't think that it's business as usual in terms of the rules. I think there's all kinds of other forces at work here, and I think the U.S. election is going to have a big, big impact on how things are played by Justin Trudeau and the people that are supporting him destroying this country.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you what your thoughts were about an intervening global event, that we're hearing about, and I'm hearing, you're aware of that, and the disturbance within a current election cycle as we know it, and I would agree with that, with my relationships with the American officials that we're tied into. I don't. I mean that this is probably more of a realization or a possibility than or an election. I'm going to say probably 80% in this as opposed to 20% in a normal election cycle. And it's not just America that's going to be if influenced by this, but also Canada, North America, and other nations. And so, when you talk about terrorist threats, within, I mean, we know from, the ones that we're connected to that this is very real and of a great, great concern. And so, I think the things that you're doing and the things you're talking about are conversations that are uncomfortable that have to be had. Uh, yeah, I mean, here's a
Well,
question. Well,
Well, let me just say on that, if in Canada we think that what's going on in the U.S. isn't going to have a direct impact on us, we're incredibly naive because we've had how many assassination attempts on President Trump? Really, what do we think is going to happen if President Trump was assassinated and my definitive hope is that he isn't, and that God protects him from the agenda to kill him. But if that were the case, what do Canadians really think is going to happen? They're just going to change the ticket, and JD Vance is going to become the presidential nominee, and things are going to continue, and the Democrats are going to win the election. I think that we need to really be a lot more sober about what our analysis is going to be. That what happened in the event that he was taken out before that election, or in the event that America voted and there was all of a sudden a huge landslide Democratic victory. You know, these are really, really significant questions for Canada because America, to my eye, seems to be on the edge of a civil war.
yes.
So if there's a destabilization of, if there's not trust in a democratic process, or if a former president with the support that Donald Trump has is wrongly removed or assassinated, do we just think that it's just going to be business as usual and everything's going to be overlooked? I think that there's been so much volatility in the U.S. that I can't imagine how there won't be an eruption in one of those situations. And if that were to happen there, that's going to have a direct impact on Canada at the very least economically,
Yeah.
just because transportation and borders and our trade is going to stop.
Yeah.
And let's hope that the value conflict that is actually at play in the American election right now doesn't actually spill over into the Canadian framework, because it's the actual issues that are being contended for in that U.S. election are the same ones that we're actually not talking about in Canada, but that are really here, right?
Yeah.
This is the battle for the soul of this nation. It
It,
really
it,
is.
it is. I mean, when I look at it, and you look at the challenges that we've had in years gone past with, you know, uh, you know, Dominion voting machines and the fraudulent, use in that and election interference, with foreign interference in Canada. This actually is even above and beyond all of that. And
Yeah.
so, we're just not in a normal kind of cycle and world right now. And I've got to ask you, and this is a big question too. Uh, when you come into power as the next Prime Minister of Canada, what are the first three things that you do? You would do?
The first thing I'm going to do is implement a policy where we actually reconnect the value framework to our constitutional structure. I think we need constitutional review and restructuring anyways. I think we need to move away from this broken system that we've now observed to be broken. I think Canada needs to move away from being under the British crown. But that I think that's a journey in time. There needs to be a lot of discussion about how that works and what it would look like. But I think the seminal piece is actually getting back to how we say yes or no to things. And this is a return to the bedrock values of the nation and the articulation of them. That is going to drive a lot of conversations. It's going to make this discussion about the compatibility in Canada with militant Islam and Canadian culture, values, and traditions very simple. There won't be any more burning of Canadian flags on our streets and the chanting of death to our nation. Those
Right.
things that's what I mean by
Yes.
reestablishing the values and traditions and connecting them into our Constitution.
Yes.
I think the second thing is that we're going to dismantle the infrastructure that has brought this this corrosive undermining of our nation into place. And by that I mean post-nationalism. By that I mean Agenda 2030, and
Mm-hmm.
and that applies at all levels of government,
Mm-hmm.
federal, provincial, municipal, and even Indigenous. We need to
Mm-hmm.
strip that out and ensure that we can actually treat each other with respect and be one people, one blood, one nation. The third thing is very simply is getting this nation back to work, and with truth, justice, and uprightness at the core of the policy, restoring justice so that we can actually build again and feel secure in our prosperity and the preservation of it for future generations.
Wow.
So that's the, I mean, every other policy can ultimately flow out of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but we have deep rooted issues, and the superficiality right now in our nation, in our conversations, is sickening. So we got to get real about what is actually wrong.
I couldn't agree more. There's a ton, like I have a ton of other questions I could ask, but I'm kind of feeling like we've gone quite a ways uh, already in this conversation, opening up a lot of things to discuss, contemplate, and really look, what we do with them. And so I guess I would say, I know that you've been, on this grassroots movement, meetings coast to coast, little communities, smaller town halls, some bigger meetings. Uh, I guess my question to you, Grant, and the next few questions or comments, I guess, and I'll maybe just kind of bundle them up here, is how can people help you, Canadians, help you right now in a practical way? How can they get signed up to support you, financially, or otherwise? I mean, if they want to get involved in how can they get involved in a United Party of Canada EDA? How do they help start one, get candidates in place? How can they, maybe they're part of an EDA that they're unhappy with, and they're maybe,
Mm-hmm.
looking to come over for a cup of tea and have a talk with you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, how, yeah, can you speak into those?
I can. Well, look, our strategy right now is essentially building candidates, and then the EDAs are building around candidates. So if you're a candidate or someone who the messages that I'm talking about, if you check out our website, etc., and you wish to be a candidate, we'd love to talk to you. If you're an existing MP and you know that the situation that I'm talking about within the Conservative Party or other parties is dire, and you want to talk, we'd love to talk to you about that. If you're in a community and you simply want to help, the starting point is to understand what our policies are. Go on the website, read about us. If you're interested, start with getting a membership. If you want to go further than that and be a part of an EDA, talk to us. There's a email address or an email button that you can send us communication on. Many of those emails will come directly to me right now, and I will answer those questions for you. We are looking for it's time for Canadians to step up. In some ways, this is no different than World War II, where there was an actual conscription. A lot of people know what's going on in the country, have a sense that it's deeply wrong, and you have skills, you have leadership ability, you have public speaking ability, you're a servant, you're a patriot, and you could serve into your local community. We need you to step up and actually step out and get past this what I see often as this mystique of kind of going into becoming an MP or going into politics. It's actually about standing up and serving the people in your community. We need people like you to engage us and come. We can't talk to everyone. We have candidates now across BC. We're building across BC, the Yukon, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and we're working on Nova Scotia. Some of the other maritime provinces we haven't got out to do as much. But if you get this message and it's resonating, we will come and we will build. So to donate, you can donate to the party. The annual maximum that you can donate is $1,725. There's a way to do that on our website. You can do it by Interact, or you can do it. There's another mechanism on the website that you can do that. So www.unitedpartyofcanada.ca, all written out in full, no abbreviations, no dots, unitedpartyofcanada.ca. This information is there. If you want to have communication directly with me, send a note into the general email and just say, I'd really like this to Grant personally, and have him respond. I will. And we start conversations this way, and this is how we build. And, just because you don't see the tip of the iceberg yet, it does not mean that there's not an iceberg about to emerge onto the political landscape here in this country. And the days of being able to just say, well, I'm just gonna compromise for because we just got to get rid of Trudeau. You're actually perpetuating the problem by taking that view. You really, really are. People know that their problems are deeper than this, and those are cop-out statements. I'm just probably had this conversation enough in the last year and a half in Canada just to call it that, and say, you really have a duty to think harder, especially if you're coming from a former Reform era party member or a social conservative perspective, because I don't know how you actually hold your faith position and still vote inside the Conservative Party, because any of the principles that you're seeing articulated within the Conservative Party are in gross violation of your spiritual values. So you're going to be under a deeper discussion someday for what it is you do or don't do, because you just decide to take a cliche position with regard to not splitting the vote. I don't know how, if you hold your faith position that you do, you can actually say, I'm going to support a party that's undermining the primacy of parental authority, or not support a responsible engagement of the abortion discussion. I just don't know how you can do it. There's a lot more at stake in this conversation right now than money, or more money in your pockets and you'll be more free. We have a national defense issue, and we have deep concerns about our culture, values, and traditions perpetuating and enduring in this nation. That is what Canada is about. We need to defend it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So yeah, I encourage you guys, reach out to Grant, as he has given those vector points. Before we wrap up, Grant, I'd like you to, you mentioned, the battle for the soul of Canada and Firing the Forge, the book that you wrote. And I guess if you maybe would share just a little bit about that, where people can get it. And then I've got some closing comments after that.
Well, sure. Well, the book, The Battle for the Soul of Canada, Firing the Forge, was written in the first half of 2023. It speaks to many of the issues that I've spoken to here today in terms of the compromises that I see within conservatism now in Canada, and I suppose as a thesis for why we found it necessary, myself and a bunch of other Canadians coast to coast, to form and to build this party as a new expression of conservatism in Canada. And I challenge you to engage it and read and see the evidence, the litany of issues that will point you to an understanding of why you can't just say, oh, I'm not going to split the vote. Read it and see. I'll be very surprised if it doesn't make you uncomfortable about what it is you're saying yes to, when you actually should be engaging the discussions and voting in a way that's different. We're providing Canadians now another opportunity to align what they are deeply held values with a democratic responsibility to steward this nation. The book is about that, and it's a fusion of, in many ways, it's a fusion of fiduciary faith of Canadians to serve their nation through a democratic process and not just cop out with the shallow offering that's being given to you. It's a flimsy politic that's being presented to you through the Conservative Party right now, and you owe yourselves and your family and your grandchildren a little bit of time to think deeper about these issues. The book is about that. You can get it on Amazon. And if you come and hear me speak, I usually have some with me because inevitably I'll end up commenting on at some portion of it or another.
Yeah. And with that, you've got a bit of a tour coming up, I understand, in the East. Uh, can you maybe share just a snippet of what that looks
Yeah.
like and how people
So,
can connect to that?
yeah, it's going to be it's running for 2 weeks, starting the 18th of October. It's it's I basically am going to be in the Toronto area, and then I actually haven't finalized all the details, or I can't just cite you where the first location is. But it's going to be we're going to be posting it on Facebook, Instagram, and at some point it'll be on our website too. So reach out if you're curious or interested. Reach out by email. We can tell you specifically, but do watch for Facebook posts, and you see it on our Facebook account, and I'll be posting it on Twitter as well.
Okay.
So
Well,
yeah, so 2 weeks. I think there's 2 weeks. We're doing 50 meetings, and it's we're going to be having some really interesting conversations, especially some of the people in Ontario that have had liens put on their farms for $400,000 because they didn't cooperate with the ArriveCan app.
wow.
And so there are a lot of issues out there that need to be engaged and discussed, and I'm going to meet a bunch of those people as well. I'm looking forward to that because it's ridiculous what's happened. Some people going and showing up at their bank maybe to redo their financing or something, and all of a sudden there's a lien placed on their title.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, there are issues, and they're actually coming to your door unless we actually start talking about them and prevent them and fix them.
Wow. Well, I would just highly recommend if you're in that area, check the website, keep an eye on it, and go, check in, shake Grant's hand, join in those conversations. Grant, I mean, I just thank you so much for joining us today. I know Canadians, I know I really appreciate it. I know Canadians will, and I just honor you and your bravery and your devotion towards this great nation of Canada and following the call that's on your life. Thank you for your leadership and willingness to stand up for the nation. I do pray God bless and protect you and your family and team, and that He would overshadow you in all your ways, and that all the resources that you need would come in as you continue to build and move forward. And I'm sure that your team is more than ready, willing, and able to help facilitate, people coming in the best that they can. And thank you to everyone who have watched this and made it to the end. And I hope that this has stirred you and challenged you as you stand, up and as you for truth and justice in Canada and stand and speak to get our country back. And again, I shamelessly ask that you share this message of insight and hope with your friends, your family, your colleagues, leaders, from sea to shining sea. And I would also want to make one more challenge, and this challenge goes out to podcasters, to other media people, to those that uh, could reach out to Grant for a similar conversation and even share this interview on your platforms, even in its rawness. There's a lot of truth here. And so, if we're going to save this great nation of Canada, we need to be bold enough to show up, stand up, and with the help from Almighty God, do what is right and true as He will bring a victory. So, um, thank you. And one other thing, Grant, uh, if people want to get connected to you for a larger Zoom call or a meeting with, maybe a cell of leaders or these kind of things, would you entertain that or? What would that look like?
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely would and do. And I think it's something that we can set up and undertake where there's interest. And if you have viewers that are watching this and they want to reach out to you to set that up, that's one way to do it. They can email us directly, and I'll do that. I mean, um, the way our nation works, it's based on relationship and trust,
Correct.
and these are how these things come to materialize. And I hope in this conversation today, I've pricked people's interest. I hope that I've maybe also made them feel uncomfortable with the status quo of their decision. We need to have these conversations. And getting on a call like this, a Zoom call, and even better in a room together, eyeball to eyeball, you actually get to develop a rapport and a trust with people. And I find when I do my presentations, I always have an open mic. It's not controlled, and we have these conversations. And it's where the greatest cheerleaders and advocates for the party are formed, because they know that there's no contrivance in terms of the discussion or the interface that actually lets them see and discern that they're not being tricked or misled. And so
Yeah.
I love that engagement. That's what
Right.
we need to do. And that's the trust that it takes to be extended to a leader to actually lead.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm taking the time today. And I think this is a very, very important audience, because it reaches across the country, and it reaches across the country with hearts that feel deeply about the issues that we're talking about and the preservation of Canada and its purpose.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Grant, for having this conversation today. I think that's about it for now. I think we'll
Okay.
wrap it up for the day here. And I just pray that God would bless and protect every family that's watching, and may He overshadow you guys all in all of your ways, and may no good thing be withheld from you.
Mm,
God bless you.
mhm, mhm. And you. Thank you, Barry.